United States, the Ku Klux Klan, return of an old hatred. In January 1950, in post-war America, a movement thought to be extinct attempts to resurface, the Ku Klux Klans. Founded in 1866 in the southern United States, in the aftermath of the Civil War, the Klan was established by former Confederate officers who opposed the abolition of slavery. Initially, it targeted freed black individuals, but also northern officials sent to reconstruct the region. Through violence, terror, in nocturnal disguises sent to reconstruct the region. Through violence, terror, and nocturnal disguises, it sought to maintain white supremacy under a pseudo-Christian veneer. Discredited by the late 1860s, the Klan was reborn in 1915 with national success. This second generation, more esoteric and organized, also attacked Jews, Catholics, immigrants, and communists. It proclaimed a 100% Americanism, but practiced lynchings, threats, and xenophobic propaganda. The movement reached several million members before declining after 1929. In January 1950, the Klan experiences a third resurgence, quieter but very real. In Stone Mountain, Georgia, activists revived the organization in a climate of racial fear and growing hostility towards civil rights. The rhetoric remains the same: defense of a white, Protestant, patriarchal America, and hatred of blacks, Jews, Reds, and foreigners. The most disturbing aspect is its religious pretense. The Klan drapes itself in crosses, Bible verses, and Christian references. Yet its ideology is completely at odds with the gospel, which proclaims that all humans are created in God's image. It is not faith that drives it, but fear, anger, and rejection of the other. This third Klan, small-scale in 1950, will fail to capitalize on the anti-communist wave sweeping the United States. Deemed too archaic, too violent, and contrary to the modern image America wishes to project globally, it already appears as a doomed relic, a shadow of a past that history is pushing to the margins. Though it will resurface in the 1960s in response to civil rights advances, it will always be driven by fear, rejection, and nostalgia for an unjust order. Brazil, political climate in Brazil. The ghost of Vargas looms. In January 1950, Brazil stands at a crossroads. Officially, the republic continues under President Dutra, a stern former general elected in 1945 under a democratic banner. But behind the institutional facade, the country is restless. The economy is slowing, inequalities are deepening, and social movements are multiplying. In the streets of Rio and the factories of Sao Paulo, voices rise against austerity, corruption, and government inaction. Many Brazilians recall one man, Getúlio Vargas. The former president, ousted 5 years earlier after ruling with an iron fist for 15 years, remains a fixture in the national imagination. For some, he embodies authoritarian paternalism. For others, a model of social justice and economic independence. Behind the scenes, Vargas is not idle. He observes, waits, and prepares his comeback. In January, the signs are already there. His supporters are organizing, newspapers speculate, and a rumor grows. Vargas could return, this time through the ballot box. The climate is tense. What was meant to be a peaceful democratic transition is about to become a battle for Brazil's soul. Even today, this month marks the start of a campaign that will divide the country between hope and fear. The General's Affair, 1949-1950, the leak that shook the French army. In the midst of the Indochina War, as France struggles to contain the rising power of the Viet Minh, a major crisis erupts at the top of the military. In May 1949, General George Ribers, Chief of Staff, is sent on an inspection mission to Indochina. Upon his return, he writes a highly critical confidential report. It describes the desperate military situation, recommends a strategic withdrawal to the Tonkin Delta, and advocates for a gradual Vietnamization of the conflict. Classified as top secret, the Rivers report is printed in only 33 copies. Yet, a few months later, its contents are broadcast on Viet Minh radio. In September, a copy is found by chance in the bag of a Vietnamese student stopped on a Paris bus. The scandal erupts. The investigation reveals the involvement of Roger Peyre, an enigmatic figure linked to both French intelligence and Vietnamese independence networks. He allegedly received the report from General Mast, Rivers' deputy, before passing it to a Vietnamese activist, Van Co, connected to the Viet Minh. The scandal is massive. In January 1950, under media and political pressure, a parliamentary inquiry commission is officially established to shed light on the affair. General Rivers and his deputy, General Mast, are soon removed from their posts. The parliamentary investigation uncovers negligence but leads to no convictions. The affair is gradually hushed up without clearly identifying a culprit. The mystery remains unresolved. Even today, it is unknown how this ultra-confidential report ended up in enemy hands. Was it a fatal oversight, an internal sabotage, or a broader manipulation operation? The General's affair remains one of the most troubling episodes of France's Fourth Republic. Colombia. The nation plunges into terrors. In early 1950, Colombia is living through one of the darkest chapters of its modern history. Since the assassination of liberal leader Jorge Eliezer Gaitan in April 1948, the country has been engulfed in a spiral of political violence known as La Violencia. It is not an official war, but a de facto civil war, staining cities and countryside with blood. In January, clashes intensify. Armed conservative militias, often tolerated by local authorities, multiply attacks on villages perceived as liberal. In response, armed groups linked to the Liberal Party organize to resist. The police often turn a blind eye or even participate in the atrocities. The outgoing president, Mariano Ospina Perez, a moderate liberal, seems powerless to stop the chaos. Meanwhile, Laureano Gomez, a hardline conservative figure, prepares to run for president in June. His authoritarian rhetoric appeals to part of the elite and alarms the rest of the population. In January 1950, Colombians live in fear. The state appears incapable of ensuring security or justice. Newspapers report massacres, burned villages, and bodies left on roadsides. And this is just the beginning. Unlike many contemporary conflicts, this one does not follow Cold War logic. It is not a clash between ideological blocs or a proxy war. La Violencia is primarily a Colombian war, born from deep internal fractures, partisan rivalries, land inequalities, tensions between urban and rural areas, between secularists and conservatives, between central power and neglected provinces, a fratricidal war that will leave a lasting mark on the country's history. West Germany, memory, justice, and moral divide in the Auerbach affair. More than 4 years after the war's end, West Germany is rebuilding. But the wounds of the past remain raw, and the question of memory divides. In Munich, one man crystallizes these tensions, Philipp Auerbach, a German Jew, former concentration camp prisoner, now head of the Bavarian Office for Compensating Nazi Regime Victims. As early as 1933, Auerbach was arrested for his public stances against the regime. Not a military resistor, he was an early opponent, detained in the first months of Nazi power. He endured multiple camps, Dachau, Buchenwald, and Auschwitz. Surviving this hell, he committed after 1945 to supporting survivors and aiding the country's moral reconstruction. For months, his methods at the Compensation Office have been criticized. He is accused of inflating figures, administrative irregularities, or even falsifications. Voices rise in the Bavarian press. Some officials want him ousted. In January 1950, public opinion is split. For some, Auerbach abuses his survivor status to act above the law. For others, he is a symbolic target, a victim of a broader desire to forget past crimes. This debate reveals a steep moral fracture. It is not about retrying history, but about how to face it. Between the desire for reconstruction and the need for memory, Germany seeks a fragile balance, and Auerbach has become, despite himself, one of its faces. USSR, literature under surveillance. In January 1950, Soviet culture no longer writes freely, it marches in lockstep. Since Andrei Jodonov's death in 1948, his doctrine continues to reign unchallenged. Every literary or artistic work must now serve the party's line, glorify the class struggle, and reject all forms of bourgeois decadence. What is already called the Jodanov doctrine imposes a totalitarian vision of creation. Art must not reflect inner truth, but socialist truth. The writer is no longer a witness to the world, but an ideological soldier. Major journals are monitored, publishers censored, and cultural critics turned into political commissars. In early 1950, two events crystallized this shift: the public condemnation of Boris Pasternak and intensified pressure on Georgian writers accused of cosmopolitanism, a term now synonymous with enemy of the people. Behind the scenes, fear dominates. Intellectuals know a single sentence can send them to the Gulag, and a misinterpreted poetic allusion can be read as treason. Literature becomes a minefield. The USSR is no longer content with rewriting history. It seeks to shape the imagination. January 1950 is not just about censorship. It is the birth of total control over consciousness. China. The world chooses sides. The world watches, stunned, as one of the great geopolitical shifts of the century unfolds. A few months earlier, Mao Zedong proclaimed the birth of the People's Republic of China. As his army crushes the last nationalist strongholds, Chiang Kai-shek's government retreats to Taiwan, now the sole bastion of what is still called Free China. But the diplomatic balance wavers. This month, the United Kingdom, India, Burma, Sweden, and others announced their official recognition of Beijing's communist regime. Formosa is gradually abandoned. The UN hesitates. Washington deliberates. And the USSR, of course, applauds. This movement is more than a matter of diplomacy. It means a quarter of humanity has officially joined the communist side. The stakes are immense. Mao's party seeks to embody the new China, rid of corrupt elites, free from Western influence, and loyal to Marxist ideology. But not everyone follows. The United States refuses to recognize the new regime. Taiwan, armed by the West, proclaims itself the true China and vows to one day return to the mainland. Two Chinas, one legitimacy, January 1950 marks the start of a fracture that still divides the world today. Japan, an army without soldiers. 5 years after Hiroshima, Japan enters a paradoxical era. Occupied by American forces, ruined but rebuilding rapidly, the country turns the page on its imperial past. In its new constitution, effective since 1947, a unique provision stands out, Article 9. It declares that Japan forever renounces war, the threat, or use of force as a means of settling international disputes. The country pledges never to maintain an army, nor to possess a navy or combat air force. A total disarmament, written in black and white, but imposed by the victors. In January 1950, this provision becomes a burning issue. The Cold War intensifies. China has fallen to the communist camp. In Korea, tensions mount, and the Americans begin to doubt their own creation. Can Japan truly be defended without armed Japanese? Behind closed doors, discussions start in Tokyo. Should self-defense forces be created? Can Article 9 be bypassed while still respected? Humiliated and pacified, Japan begins a fundamental debate. Can a nation be sovereign without military power? A question that will haunt it for decades. Egypt, the wounds of 1948 remain unhealed. In January 1950, the Arab world is still nursing its wounds. 2 years earlier, the defeat in the Arab-Israeli war left a bitter taste in every capital. In Egypt, this military humiliation triggered an unprecedented crisis of confidence. King Farouk is contested, the army discredited, and the Muslim Brotherhood, a long marginalized Islamist organization, gains influence. Public opinion cedes, accusing the elites of betraying the Palestinian cause and yielding to Zionism. In January, a significant event crystallizes the anger. The Egyptian government refuses to officially recognize Israel despite international pressure. This stance, far from calming tensions, fuels internal unrest. Protests erupt. The press is muzzled. The regime tries to reassert its authority, but everyone senses something is faltering. The monarchy seems outdated. The army, stung by its defeat, begins reorganizing in secret. In the shadows, young officers dream of a different future for Egypt. January 1950 is not yet the revolution, but it is already the stirring of the post-Farouk era. A decade later, this movement will bear a name, Nasser. Africa, Ivory Coast, January 30 and 1950. Tensions in the colonial empire. On January 30 and 1950, in the town of Dimbokro, Ivory Coast, a peaceful demonstration by agricultural workers turns tragic. That day, several protesters are killed, shot by French colonial forces. In the context of French West Africa, a federation of territories administered from Dakar, social demands are gaining momentum. Unions, supported by political leaders like Félix Houphouët-Boigny, advocate for better working conditions, an end to discrimination, and recognition of African workers' rights. The Dimbokro mobilization is part of this dynamic. The protesters advance unarmed, in a spirit of advocacy but non-violence. Yet, the authorities respond with force. Tensions escalate. Then shots are fired. The toll is heavy, several dead, many injured, and a climate of shock. A cursory investigation is launched, but the affair yields no clear accountability. It remains little known outside militant circles and barely covered in metropolitan press. This episode illustrates the limits of dialogue in the colonial framework at a time when political and social aspirations are intensifying across Africa. Though not an official turning point, Dimbokro becomes a warning signal, a reminder that relations between the governed and the administration are increasingly fragile. As the 1950s unfold, tensions mount, and the prospect of political change begins to take shape. India, January 26, 1950, birth of a republic. On January 26, 1950, India celebrates a historic moment, the entry into force of its constitution, the result of 2 years of debates by the Constituent Assembly. This monumental text, the longest in the world at the time, transforms India from a dominion to a sovereign republic. Its core principles, democracy, secularism, social justice, and fraternity, reflect the dream of a united and diverse nation. The Assembly, chaired by Dr. Rajendra Prasad, adopted the text in November 1949 but chose January 26, the anniversary of the 1930 Independence Proclamation, as its effective date. That day, Rajendra Prasad becomes the first president of the Republic of India. But his role, though prestigious on paper, remains largely ceremonial. Real executive power lies with Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, head of government elected through universal suffrage. The Constitution establishes a separation of powers and a parliamentary system in which the President acts on the advice of the Council of Ministers, ensuring a balance between institutions. In 1950, India's population exceeds 360 million, still including, in statistics from the recent partition, regions that will later become Pakistan and Bangladesh. From its birth, India becomes the world's largest democracy by population and the scope of its political project. Festivities in New Delhi mark the event. Military parades, folk dances, and the raising of the tricolour flag symbolize unity and diversity. It is the official birth of the Republic of India, now fully sovereign and democratic. January 26 will become the national holiday, an annual reminder of an ambitious social contract founded on equality, modernity, and plurality.